All right, welcome everyone. Welcome. We'll just give a couple minutes for everyone to stream in from the waiting room, but I want to say hello to you wherever you are in the world. And if you'll tell us in the chat where you are in the world, we're always so curious where everyone's tuning in from. I see we've got a few people maybe driving in the car. You're so welcome to keep your camera on or off. It'll just be our faces captured on the recording. And we do make the recording. Oh, wow. Someone from Israel, from New Orleans. Great. I'm so glad to have you all here. And yes, we do record and it will go onto YouTube after that way. You might even be right now watching this on YouTube afterwards, after our live event, but just so you know, the gifts and the wisdom of this conversation can be available to others and for a long time to come. And with that, we will kick it off. I'll introduce myself. Lydia will introduce herself. We'll set a frame for the panel, and then we'll kick it off. My name's Chelsea. I've been in recovery, recovering, whichever term. I'm not too fussy about them for about 19, almost 20 years now. I've been running Eat, Breathe, Thrive. So I'm the executive director of Eat, Breathe, Thrive for, it'll be, I think, our 13th year this year. Yeah, which is kind of makes me feel really old. It's just the fact that I've been doing it but it's great. I'm so glad. And Laura, actually, who's with us today, has been with it since very early days. But we're a nonprofit. We're based in Boulder, Colorado, but have our branches all over the world. I live in London these days, in the UK, and we're dedicated to preventing and helping people recover from eating disorders. And we're so excited to be partnering and having partnered for just over a year with EDF on these events on how we recover. And I will hand it to Lydia to say a little bit about EDF and herself.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks, Chelsea. Yes, I am the program director. My name is Lydia Brino. I use any pronouns. I'm the program director at the Eating Disorder Foundation, which is a Denver-based nonprofit that also provides free resources, support, advocacy, and education for individuals as well as family and friends struggling with eating disorders. This is one of my favorite series of events that we've been doing just with Chelsea and Eat, Breathe, Thrive, and all of the folks that I get to meet from Eat, Breathe, Thrive, and the community members like Otter that we get to bring to these talks just to share some hope and stories of recovery, because often we hear so much around the devastating parts of the illness, and I feel like we rarely get times to celebrate the recovery stories and to hear the voices of folks that are living in recovery. So always one of my favorite things to do is to pop on and to have these conversations that leave my mind bubbling with more like insight and information throughout like the days to come after. So very excited to be here with everyone coming to y'all from Denver. And I will hand it over to Otter to do an introduction, and then we'll hand it over to Laura, and then we'll get started.
Good morning. My name's Otter. Here in Denver, it says so. I've been in recovery for about 15 years. Currently, I am facilitating the On Solid Ground Support Group at EDF. Other than that, I'm really excited to talk about this stuff.
Hi, I'm Laura, and I've been recovered or in recovery for over 20 years. I just had to do the math, and that was interesting to see that it's been that long, which is awesome. And yeah, I'm a facilitator for Eat, Breathe, Thrive. I've been with them since I think 2015. Just fell in love with Chelsea's mission, and I had just become a yoga teacher, and then being able to marry the two was just the most wonderful blend, and has also aided in unveiling different levels of recovery and discovery of myself. So I'm just so grateful for that, and our Eat, Breathe, Thrive community and all the wonderful women in there that I've become so close with. And yeah, I'm on Vancouver Island, British Columbia, and yeah, homeschool mom and got teen kids now, so going through that.
Oh, amazing. I'm so glad to be here with you all. I'll kick us off with our first question. So our theme today is, does it ever get better? And we chose that just because I think we wanted to acknowledge and recognize that while there's, I think all of us would probably agree that recovery is possible. It doesn't always feel that way in the moment. And it can feel pretty never ending, and it can feel pretty hopeless and despairing at moments. And that kind of brings me to our first question. I remember Melanie and I were at an eating disorder conference last year, and we were walking around the sponsor booths, and it seemed like every other booth said recovery is possible. And I was thinking, like, wow, I'm really glad we didn't just put recovery is possible, because we considered it on on our banner. But it also made me think, like, we all agree recovery is possible, but like there's a but on that sentence. And I wonder how would you finish that sentence? Recovery is possible, but what's the kind of reality on the other side of that slogan that we all pretty much agree on?
I'd say it's not linear. I'd say that's the biggest thing, and false expectations I feel like I had in the beginning of my recovery was that I was never going to falter, or I was never going to have those thoughts again, or I was never going to have the urges, or I was never going to relapse. So I think that letting that be normal and normalizing that, and I think that's the biggest part of being in community, is hearing other stories that you're not alone in that. Which I feel like in my time, it was back in the 90s, and it wasn't talked about, and there was nobody to have that conversation with. So it felt very isolating, and I felt like I was always messing up. Yeah.
I think the thing for me is definitely recovery is possible, but I noticed that a lot of people define it differently, as in kind of mirroring off what Laura said is, well, what is it? Does it mean slip ups? Is that you're done? And so for me, over time, my definition of recovery has shifted into almost like an overall, how am I doing perspective, recognizing that no day is perfect. And really the thing that I've learned is just being able to watch my mind. It's a meditative concept of my mind is thinking, even though I think it's supposed to be quiet, but I'm just watching it, and then getting back to my breath, or in this case, back to my recovery. And that's what I've learned. Recovery is definitely possible, but it's something that we consistently learn to watch and get better at.
Like initially when I hear it, I want to say like, but it looks different for everyone. And I know that that's like a very like general statement, but it really like it is so individualized. And I think that for some people, maybe some people's recovery, like for them, feels pretty natural or simple. For other people, it can mean that it's going to be really hard and feel like there's a lot of pieces that need to move so that the recovery puzzle can come together easier. But yeah, I think that it's just, but it feels so different and it looks so different, and all of those pieces are so individualized. And I think that can feel really scary for some people. And for me, it feels more like empowering that we all get to define and create what our recovery looks like. But then there's pieces of what Laura said and what Otter both said in that too, that it's not linear, and that it's something that we get to observe and be attached with and be mindful of. Yeah, I love that. I love thinking about the but part of it.
Yeah. I was thinking you could also substitute but with and, it doesn't even have to be a but, it could be and, I think for me, I guess I would just say but or and, it can feel impossible at times, and it can feel extremely difficult. And it's so much harder than I thought it would be, to be honest. Like it was, and I know it's good that not everybody has that experience, that it's really, really difficult. But I know for me, I would hear that phrase, recovery is possible, and I would think, but not for me. Like you have no idea, how deep this is. Like I'm going to be caught in this forever. And I think there was no way through it without the doing, without the actual putting one foot forward and doing the thing that felt impossible day after day after day, and not looking too far in the future, and just going, okay, it feels impossible, but today I can have a meal, or today I can not engage in that behavior, and all of that. And wildly over time. For a lot of time, it did get easier, but there were periods in the very beginning that felt pretty difficult. So I think it's important to hold that, to hold both. It's possible, and it can be really difficult at times, and there's no real way of kind of making that any different than it is. Yeah.
Well, and on that too, I just love how you piece apart too, that there's like, I feel like there were phases where I was not acting on the disorder, but my mind was still there and wanting to be there. And so, yes, I was eating, but my mind was a mess, like, yes, I was eating, but I was angry, or yes, and so there's so many phases of recovery, and not to expect it all to happen at once. Like, that there's going to be where you just have to nourish your body no matter what. And there's just establishing habits, and there's just establishing support systems, and the rest comes through, and over years too, and not underestimating that this takes years. And I feel like there's so many layers that have, gone throughout the years, even though I have been physically recovered and not acting on my behaviors, there's been a lot to tease out when it comes to the mental aspect of things, and being able to feel compassion or forgiveness, or all of those things. So it's a lifelong process. And I think also just remembering that we're human. We would never expect anyone else to not have a hard day or use coping mechanisms that were less than optimal, so.
I think that's something that always comes up for me too, is that it's like I feel like when early on, like in the process, it can be like, well, I want to know what it looks like. I want to know what my recovery is going to look like, what it's going to feel like when I'm going to get there, how long it's going to take, like all of those questions. And then realizing that it's like, oh, it's just like something for me, it's something I get to engage with, and I get to make that choice to choose to say like, yeah, like I'm not going to engage in these, like when I'm able to, right? Like early on, it was like, when I'm able to not engage with them, I'm going to choose these other options. And being able to say like, yeah, like over now, like looking at the past 10 years, I'm like, oh, I see the things that I've edited or the pieces that I'm learning at that time, and really looking at it as being like, yeah, like we're going to each have a different like time length that it takes us to learn different skills, to actually implement them, to see our recovery working in ways with us. And to really not look at it as, for me, like that timeline of like, when am I going to get there? What's it going to look like? Because I don't know what, like, if I wouldn't have had the like surrendering moment that I did with my recovery of being like, I just have to like allow this to happen and just see what happens, because I know what my eating disorder is telling me is going to happen in my life, and that's apparently not coming true. So I'm going to choose this other option and choose recovery and see what that has to offer. And then actually being able to look now at the past 10 years and being like, oh, I just had to learn those lessons at those times, and give myself the space and the grace and the compassion to actually move through it and move with it, instead of fighting so hard and needing it to look or feel a certain way. So very, very, it's just like, it makes me feel so grateful when we get into these conversations. I do see someone that popped a question here, so I want to move into that too, because I really like also adjusting it to like the recovery is possible, and how do we do it when there's other complex health issues that come in, and when there's other maybe mental health struggles that co-occur, and how do we do the recovery piece and these other things that may come up along the way. I think it's a really beautiful way to segue into the conversation.
I think there's an aspect of the question in the chat that I think I can speak specifically to. And I love that you framed it in a broader terms. So I'll leave the broader terms for you all to answer. I think one of the things that doesn't get talked about enough with all eating disorders is the impact it has physiologically on your body, particularly on your gut. There is no, the nature of an eating disorder is that it affects our gut. It affects our stomach and our digestive system. And especially for those of us who maybe have had an eating disorder for a long period of time, the gut changes. And then when we start back in recovery, it doesn't necessarily change quickly back to how it was before. And it may never even go fully back to how it was before. I think for many years in treatment, kind of the complaints we had about, oh, my stomach hurts, I feel, I feel really full and I've only just had a small amount, were kind of dismissed as like just eating disorder behaviors. But I think what we're learning from research is that there's actual legitimacy to it. There's slowed gastric emptying. There's like a slow and sometimes a lessened release of gastric acids that help us break down food. Some of us have to be on medications for a long time to help our body process food or might have blockages. So how do you deal with all of those things is part of that question. And oh my gosh, there's no one answer to it. I think one is just acknowledging that it's real and it's legitimate and it is really uncomfortable and it can last for a long period of time. And there's no way to get it better without moving into recovery. It's just going to, it's staying where you are, like continuing to go back to eating disorder behaviors and disordered eating and all of that kind of stuff just makes it worse. It just creates the cycle. So it's one of those things where the only way through it, or the only way through it is kind of through it, it's just to kind of go through. I used to describe it as, I felt like going into treatment and dealing with that stuff was like re-breaking a bone. Like it got worse before it got better. And I had to be on medications for a very long time. And I will say, I think it's pretty much normal now, but I want to say it took years. And so part of it was having lots of talks with doctors and being honest and being direct about the symptoms I was having and, trying to get those seen after. And there were medications that sometimes helped and sometimes they didn't do very much, and it was, I used, it was years into getting into yoga practices and mindful meditation that I learned that just slowing my breathing after a meal and calming my anxiety helped a lot with gut motility, just because if your body's in fight or flight and you're anxious and nervous, it stops your gut from processing. So I think mindfulness and meditation and yoga, and there's even kind of poses. There's a wind releasing pose, literally in yoga. It's called wind releasing pose. I think it's we underappreciate is that there's a lot of stuff that can be done there, but also it's just difficult. And so I think it's important to talk to your medical professionals. And there's definitely medications that may be able to help. And sometimes they're not. Sometimes they only help a little bit, and sometimes it feels like they're not helping much at all. And my experience is that every year it got better, every single year, but it did take years. And that's my own particular experience. It might not take that long for you, but I would just emphasize that staying caught in the disordered eating cycle, going in and out of it, just made it worse. So, yeah, that's my just really specific answer to your question.
I just want to say thank you for saying that. I feel like I struggled with, and still, depending on my anxiety, struggle with GI issues, but that wasn't talked about back in the day. And it was dismissed and I was just blown off many, many times. And this is, many years ago now. There's a lot more, like you said, research and stuff, but I think that was the biggest thing. Is that loop, right? That the anxiety that happens around eating and then you eat and then you feel awful. And so it's not this positive feedback loop that like, oh, I actually feel nourished or I feel better. It's like this initial, like it physically does not feel good in the body and it's uncomfortable. And so it's really hard to work through that. And yeah, it wasn't until understanding the nervous system and how to use the breath and how to use the body and how to, that was able to help things, and along with medications and things like that, like you're saying, Chelsea, it's just, but I don't feel like it was, maybe it is, now more these days, I feel like it's talked about. And I remember going, when I was in San Francisco, I went to one of the treatment centers, to one of their talks, and I left in tears because it was such an open and inviting conversation about that validated that was an experience and didn't just blow off their clients. And it was just like, thank you, thank you for acknowledging that it's not just me saying I don't want to eat because it doesn't feel good. It's like, can we actually, work with these symptoms and make me more comfortable in this process of healing? So yeah, thanks.
I've been in enough support groups where people have brought up the topic, which I'm sure some people have heard about, that we grieve the loss of our eating disorder. And in the past few months, I've come to this conclusion that the purpose of grief is for us to learn how to accept our new normal. And for some people, they can't accept their new normal and they continue to grieve and struggle. Um, Things will change. It is their new normal. The question is, can we mentally and emotionally, spiritually accept that new normal? And it's hard. We still have to go through the phases of grief. We still have to go through denial. We still have to go through, depending on how quick it may be for each phase is different. But I've recognized that accepting my new normal may include saying my body's now going to work the way it is. And another concept I've thought about is the difference between fixing and healing. Fixing is putting something back the way it was. Healing is, you know, uh, healing a wound, not something that's broken. We're not broken. We've been injured. And so accepting the fact that I may be different, but I can still heal. And accepting that this is my new normal and I love it. So that is my mindset around that. What happens with, medical issues that may or may not get better.
I think you're touching on something really, really helpful to be in consideration about, is that it's like, yeah, like things are going to change throughout the recovery process, and there's going to be parts of it, parts of the healing that are really painful and that might not clear up right away, right? Like I heard Chelsea say that it was years, and that there's some things that I know that I've struggled with from the time that I started my recovery currently, that are just things that I'm like, yeah, the acceptance piece feels really helpful, of saying like, I'm not expecting my body to be perfect, internally functioning, or, like anyway, and just allowing myself to say like, can I accept the way that my body functions, and can I make peace with that, with however it's needing to function right now, and releasing any maybe internalized blame that I have for the ways that maybe I contributed to, some like or the way that the eating disorder contributed to some of the patterns or some of the systems that got disrupted. And being able to say like, that's okay. I didn't have all the tools I have now. I had no way of knowing what was going to happen, how I was going to be able to cope with it. And being able to say like, I can release any guilt from myself for the way that my body may have changed. And then to turn it, always for me, trying to bring it back to like, can I have compassion for this experience and for allowing my body to heal in whichever form it's going to, and being able to allow that to just be, while saying that it's going to be hard, and there's going to be pieces that I think just are okay with, for me, like saying like, I'm okay that these parts might not clear up and that I might never get to a place that I was before, right? Like the fixing kind of idea of it, of being back to my previous self, and just saying like, yeah, like this is where I am now and I'm going to be okay with that. And while saying that it can also be hard. I think holding both of those things for me, usually everything is a both and for me. So saying that like, I can accept it and it can be hard. Those two things don't have to live independently.
Yeah. I so appreciate how you both just answered that question, and what are you bringing in that acceptance piece? Some things, everything changes, but nothing remains the same. We're never, we don't go back in time. We only go forward. And I think I want to pick up on that strand and ask a question. It's related, but maybe somewhat different. Knowing that many of us may suffer from, or experience, maybe not suffer from, experience long-term physical consequences from an eating disorder, relational consequences. Maybe there's things that happen in our families, in our social circles, in our friend circles that are consequent of having an eating disorder. And maybe even just emotional, trauma, from sometimes being into all of those things, knowing that those things we carry with us. I guess I wonder how you, my question is kind of around forgiveness. It's how do you, and I don't know if I'm articulating it very well, but holding all of those things that may be very hard, wishing maybe there may be moments where we wish we could go back in time and have done it differently, or that we could be living a different life than we are at this moment. I don't know if you've ever had those experiences, or wishing our family was different, and that we hadn't ruptured that relationship. How do you work with that process? And maybe forgiveness isn't part of it, but how do you work with acceptance, forgiveness, and yeah, moving forward, even in the presence of that, those kinds of pain and I don't have another word for it, wounds, burden, baggage, something along those lines.
I'll have to say that just even you saying that like brought tears to my eyes, just like that. I feel like that is such a struggle of like, for me, I felt like it was forgiving myself, like you're saying, for the ruptures that it created and the damage that it caused. And I think it's I think, yeah, I think that takes time and a whole lot of compassion, of recognizing like you did the best you could do with what you had. And I think recognizing that, you know, it is a disorder and that like the mind takes over, and like there's never intentional harm that you're doing, and to forgive yourself for that. And I feel like, I don't know, I guess for me, it's just trying to allow myself to grow and evolve and give back, right? Um and let go of needing to control whether or not, like, the way that people view me, and hoping that me moving forward in my life is not a testimony to my growth, but like me, like acknowledging that I recognize that it was not a good scenario. I don't know how to articulate this very well, but that's a lot. It's a lot to hold. And I think, yeah, self-forgiveness has been one of my challenges for sure. Yeah.
I think I've thought of this concept of forgiveness for a while. And one of the first things I recognize that forgiveness and absolution are completely different. And the purpose behind it is different. And if we confuse the two, it gets confusing as to what is it that I'm looking for. And forgiveness in my mind is not forgetting what happened, but processing and letting go of the emotion that may have been created by a particular event or set of circumstances. And, you know, I don't know if it goes back to acceptance or not, but, you know, the concept of PTSD is reliving that emotion again and again and again. And so forgiveness is not something you ask from someone else, but something that you do yourself, meaning I need to let the emotion go from this particular situation. And like what Laura said, is saying that I didn't choose to do these things. My mind was conditioned, or my experiences created a vortex of this is just going to be what's going to happen. You know, if somebody said, would you like, at age 5, would you like an eating disorder for the rest of your life? I would have said, no, thanks, you know, but that wasn't one of the questions they asked. It just happened. And I think there's also a big difference between guilt and shame. Brene Brown does a great job of describing that, meaning guilt is feeling regret for a behavior, and shame being you're talking about who you are and judging yourself. So it's a difference between failing and being a failure. We all fail at things, but I would not consider myself a failure. And so distinguishing between those helps me accept the fact that, okay, I didn't like the consequences of that choice. I will try to do better without the shame that goes along with it. And that's hard. That's been one of the hardest things I've had to learn how to do, is to stop thinking I was at fault. It was me. I did it. I chose to do that. And learning how to accept the fact that, well, I chose it, but that was the only options I had at the time. That was the only options my brain gave me at that moment. And so I did the best I could. So, and again, that's a hard thing to accept, knowing now that there were other options. So just hard.
Yeah, I love like the depth of this question, because I think for me, it's bringing up that, so I struggled with my eating disorder, but my mom also struggled with an eating disorder throughout like my adolescent years. She had struggled with it throughout earlier in her life too, but like really became prominent again when I was in my early teens. And thinking about the forgiveness that I have for her, like in her eating disorder too, of just like, she did the best she could with the tools that she had. And back when she was trying to navigate her recovery, however many years ago that was, like there was not a lot of tools. And I have like the utmost forgiveness and acceptance and grace for being like, I knew that it wasn't my mom that was making those choices. It was her illness. And that for me was like a very different experience of not saying that there was judgment or blame or that shame, that I would hear so frequently in like my mom's words to herself. But for me, I was like, oh, well, this makes sense that was, that was your coping mechanism that you had. And that's been actually a really helpful way for me to bridge that acceptance and forgiveness for myself too, of things of saying like, oh, well, it makes sense, even more so in my case that I was like, oh, well, that was the conditioning that my mom had. Like there's parts of her DNA that are very lively in me too, that the conditioning also was what I had access to. And that's okay. But that's where my brain needed to go to keep me safe at those times. And that's what was familiar for, genetic reasons too. But being able to have that forgiveness and acceptance for my mom so easily really, I feel like set me up well to then also be able to extend that for myself. And while also knowing that too, like, I feel like the act of forgiveness is a constant thing for me, and forgiveness and acceptance of like, it's okay that I didn't know now, like then what I know now. And I think for me, it was really difficult to hear that because that's always when the shoulds pop in of like, well, I should have known. Like I view myself as like an aware person. I'm like, I know these things. And then also being able to say like, oh, but I didn't. And that's okay. And that is okay. And there was no expectation for that to be the reality at the time. But yeah, being able to connect it to me for a family, like a loved one, was really helpful in getting myself to that place that the forgiveness bridge to me a little bit easier, I think.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really, it is a really deep question. It brings a lot up, doesn't it? I resonate with what all of you said. I think there's kind of three things that come to mind. I mean, one is there's guilt and sometimes shame and difficulty in terms of kind of how it, in terms of relational guilt, and particularly for me, it was my sister. I have a younger sister, and wishing I could have been a much better sister to her. There was anger there. And so part of it has been acknowledging the pain and doing my best to make amends, and acknowledge the pain that was there and the impact, and also acknowledging that I did the best I could. But that act, of course, you may not get back what you want on the other side of that. But the act of doing it, I think, was very important in my process of acknowledging pain, acknowledging letdowns, all those things. I think there's another kind of pain that can linger after an eating disorder. And it's kind of relates to what Laura said about forgiving yourself. And it's so funny because this will rear its head in moments that I never expect. I'm coming into my mid-30s now, and I don't have kids yet, and so it'll be little things like just fear around my reproductive health, those kinds of things. And those I find much more difficult because they're private. They're private, and no one sees it when it rears up, and except I feel it inside, and I feel the guilt and the shame and the oh, what if, or I had an injury last year. I had a stress fracture, and it just came, if you hadn't done this when you were a kid, now you've got, all of those things. So I think acknowledging it when it comes up, especially when it's that private kind of cycle in my head, and just being able to name it and go, oh, there you are, and kind of disentangle it, is really important, because it will show up in these really kind of dark, private thoughts that I don't often see coming. I think the last thing I'd say around it is kind of a practical piece, and I've seen it work. I mean, it just has helped me tremendously in my life, and I've gotten to witness it kind of show up in others. And having an eating disorder was a very dark time in my life, and so trying to make that time in my life a service to someone else or the world or people, or, it's an act of alchemy, and it's been necessary for my process of self-forgiveness and making meaning of that time in my life. And so I've just, moved my whole career into it, running a nonprofit, getting together with people like in this group. But I've seen it happen in smaller ways in people I work with. It might be, jumping into mentorship or working with kids, but trying to turn those really difficult times in your life, or those things that you feel shame around, into gold. I call it, I really do think it's alchemy, trying to turn it into something that's a benefit to others, so that you have a different frame of mind around it.
I love that. That got me thinking along a lot of different lines. Oh, Laura, did you want to say something?
Well, I don't know. And this is a little bit off topic, but I feel like it's coming up because you're talking about kind of like those dark moments or whatever, or those quiet moments that things come in. And I just want to acknowledge as well. And I think, when you're talking about, having kids and all of that, just recognizing as well, like, I don't think I expected things to come up again, like you think I got it covered, we're moving through, like we're doing this thing. But then it's like, and then you have kids, and and that's a very body centered thing, right? Like lots of changes, lots of hormones, lots of, different things. And I think just being able to kind of move through that, because I feel like, now that I'm starting to reach, menopause, I'm in perimenopause, and it's just like, again, things come up, like the body, like anytime the body changes without your permission, and it's been really interesting to have these old thoughts or these old patterns where it's like, I'll recognize it. I'm like, and it takes me a couple days sometimes though, if I'm busy, and recognize like I'm starting to like obsess on my physical, like the way I look versus the way that I feel, and becoming just like everything else falls away, and it comes all consuming. And then it's like, okay, like I need to get back to, function versus form. Like things are going to change, and it's more about my experience in my body, and like kind of needing to rehearse things a little bit in those moments when it feels like it's out of your hands, and to not be, just, I guess, just to have that normalized too, that those big moments in your life, that sometimes things can come up, or like a death of someone, like whatever, when it comes to just like that instinct to cope in this other way of like, oh, you kind of grasp onto something, but it's like, okay, breathe, remember I have other coping tools now. I recognize this, and then to talk yourself through, and re-engage in those practices, reach out to those people that, it's okay to have those that understand those conversations. And yeah, so it's just, yeah, it's interesting, moving through life with it, and just allowing yourself to be fluid and human.
I love that. That was a conversation that actually came up in one of our support groups recently, was just about the experience of like being in recovery, navigating recovery, and then transitioning into like perimenopause and like menopause, and just like the way that our bodies, for male identifying bodies too, just like that our bodies are going to change throughout our lives. And I think that's something that to me has also been something that I've like really latched onto as like a guiding post of recovery, has been like, things are going to change. I want to give my brain the freedom to develop and grow, and for my mindset to grow and change throughout my life. And by allowing my brain to do that, I like also want to allow my body to do whatever it needs to do to keep me growing, alive, safe, like however that's going to look. So those things come up for me a lot, and just hearing them like talked about in group, and then here again, I'm like, oh yeah, the fluidity that like recovery has brought into like my life. I know there was a question up here that I wanted to touch on really quick around how do you let go of guilt over the way you were inadequate as a parent when your kids were younger because of your eating disorder. I don't have kids myself, but I think I can speak to the piece of the way that I would hope to speak to my, that I wish my mom could hear me say to her around, because I'm sure she held some of these beliefs around guilt of feeling inadequate when we were younger. And as a child of a mother with an eating disorder, I would say that as a kid, I had no expectations for my mom to be like, I was not viewing or grading her along her qualities of being a parent, but it was much more around like, was she like interested in me? Was she loving me? Those things I knew to be true. And she showed that to me all through my life. So I have no doubt that that's something that I can say like, yeah, that was your coping skills. Like those were what you had available. There's, of course, we can have times of inadequacy. It doesn't mean that we're inadequate altogether. And that I learned a lot of acceptance and freedom and strength and courage from my mom around watching her battle her eating disorder and fight with her eating disorder. So if anything, I hope that can be just something that you're able to say like, yeah, like, it's part of my story, and also it's not my whole story. Like you are a full person outside of the eating disorder, as a parent and as yourself too. So I don't know if anyone else wanted to speak around that piece around releasing guilt. Maybe it's as a parent, or maybe it's also as a sibling, as a family member, as a human. And then I know we also saw some other questions pop in here too, but I wanted to touch on that piece real quick.
I'd like to give my perspective on that. There's a lot of questions of when I think these things or I feel these things, or these happens, how do I, for example, somebody said, how do you not let it discourage you? And my thought on that is your brain's going to do it. Your brain's going to get discouraged. You're going to feel grief. You're going to feel shame at times. And trying to prevent that is, I don't think, is as important as to the work that happens after feeling those things. There's a reason why we feel those things. In my mind, anxiety tells us things that are very important that we should address. And my natural response was to avoid them, which of course is the exact opposite of what my body is asking me to do, which is address them. But I wouldn't know that unless I actually started thinking about, why do I feel anxiety? Why do I feel discouraged? Why do I feel like I've let my children down? Because it's the underlying reason for those feelings that are important, and not trying to stop them, not trying to avoid them. And honestly, that's, like Chelsea said, taken years. And still I struggle with not wanting to feel certain things. But the answer is, how do we stop them, but what do we do when we feel them? Feel the feels.
And for me, I have two boys who are 12 and 15. And even though I wasn't active in my eating disorder when I had my children, I definitely feel like I struggled with postpartum depression and extreme anxiety. And there was a lot of, feeling like didn't handle things well sometimes. And yeah, again, it comes, I feel like, back to, self-compassion for yourself of moving through with the tools that you have. But I've also just tried to really be transparent with my kids of, I'm going through this right now. This has nothing to do with you. Like you have, or the apologizing afterwards. Like, I'm sorry for my outburst. I was feeling this way, not because of you, just because I'm feeling anxious today. I'm trying to move through that. So, and this is how, like, I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to go make a phone call, or and trying to instill in them as well, and not only an understanding, but also their own toolbox of like understanding if they see this kind of experience within themselves of like knowing why I'm doing what I'm doing, what I felt like I had to learn, as an adult. So trying to just kind of like teach them as I'm learning as well, and incorporate that into our family kind of dynamics, versus ignoring it or allowing there to be silence, and then for them to wonder if it's them. I never want them to wonder if it's their fault. and take ownership for how I'm feeling. But also, you know, that huge air of compassion around I am human, I make mistakes. You know, and not being afraid to apologize, but also, you know, always moving forward and growing and talking together through it all. So um that's kind of how I try to deal with it, I guess.
Those were really great answers, and I don't know that I have too much to add to what I said earlier on, and I want to get to a couple more of these questions. So if it's okay, I'll just go to, and I think I want to bring both of these together because I think they're kind of related but slightly different questions. Do you ever regret recovering, and how do you deal with that? And this person says one of their biggest fears, they might wake up a few days and years or years into recovery and realize they made the biggest mistake of their life. And then another question related to that is, once you're well into recovery, would you say there are actual days that you don't think about it? So just quickly answer, do you ever regret recovering? I have to honestly say, never. I don't regret recovering at all. I am so grateful that I am not in that form of suffering anymore. I think in the first couple of years, I had days like that where I just woke up and I just wanted nothing more than my coping skill teddy bear. And it was just, I was dealing with all of the feelings. I was in a really unpleasant place with my body physically. But on the other side of that, I can honestly say I never look back and go, gosh, I hate how my body looks now. I wish I'd just stuck with an eating disorder, or I never, I'm so, or that I miss looking at, you know, food and just seeing numbers, you know, that doesn't, so I'm really grateful. And I would say, I think most people I know that have got solid recovery, you know, or have that feeling of gratitude that they have it. And I think, related to that, once you're well into recovery, would you say there are actual days when you don't think about it? Yes, 100%. All the time. I almost never think about it. It is such a joy. It's liberation. I don't know how to describe it, but that. And I didn't think that was possible. And it wasn't possible for many years. You know, it used to be a conscious effort where thoughts, and I would have to go, no, and compartmentalize them. And it was a struggle. It was struggle city for years with my body, with food, with my relationships, with my feelings, all of it. I do not think I do not have that battle on a regular basis. And I have days where I forget that I ever had an eating disorder. It really, you know, like if it just doesn't cross my mind that day. Other than the fact that I do this work every day, you know, but I don't know. And others have different experience, but that's within the realm of possibilities.
Yeah, I love this question actually, because I think that is something that people feel like hesitant to ask people is like, yeah, have you felt like it's a mistake? You know, because I feel like that's really valid to ask. And also same with Chelsea, 100% now. I feel like my life has opened up in so many different ways that I could never have even imagined. Like when I was in my eating disorder, because my eating disorder made my life so narrow and so afraid and so fearful. And I've done things that I'm amazed that I've been able to accomplish and been able to do since being in recovery. So there's like, and not to say that life is perfect because of recovery, like I've accepted that that's not reality. And that I'm gonna have hard days and that there's going to be times that are really tough, but never have I ever said that like recovery has been a mistake, like one bit. Um, and same, I always think this question is funny too, though. There are days I actually don't think about it because I'm like, no, I think about eating disorders almost every day because this is my work that I do. So I'm like, no, I'm always aware of it. But my relationship with like my own eating disorder, yeah, I don't think about it almost ever anymore, which I think even a year ago, I would have said a different answer to that too, which is really cool to see that like, yeah, maybe last year I had like 1 or 2 days that I think about it, you know, but now I'm like, yeah, I don't even, sometimes I'm like, is it even valid for me to speak about recovery? Because I'm like, I don't even like think about my eating disorder like ever anymore. But then I'm like, no, that's just where I'm at right now in my recovery process. So yes, I will 100% say from my perspective that, yeah, I don't I feel really fortunate that I don't have to think about it, and that's, yeah, I'm not connected to that suffering anymore.
Yeah, I just have to say too, that speaking about that narrow focus, I think that, it often when we are in that recovery phase, it feels like that it's like an extraction, but then there's a void, right? And so it feels scary to step into the void because there's been no space for anything else, right? And I just feel like you're saying that, like, I feel like I live a life that I never in a million years could imagine that I've done the things that I've done in the past 20 years. And so, and so just there's an aspect of trust, right? And I feel like there's recovery, but then there's also discovery phase of like rediscovering who you are and what you do love about life and what you do love about experiencing, and re-engaging in the world and allowing it to kind of just unfold in this really beautiful way. Not to say that there aren't challenges and struggles along the way, but you start holding capacity for that, because I think one of the, like, I never understood this in the beginning, but it wasn't until later that somebody articulated that you're learning to hold capacity for joy, and like recognizing like how when we deaden ourselves, when we numb ourselves, that we're numbing ourselves to that too. So the idea of coming alive again and feeling in our bodies and experience the world feels very scary, because the reason we shut down because it was painful, but we forget that we've shut down the joy too. And so it's like, can I hold that space for that to come in and in small amounts, because it feels scary that you can't hold it for long. And so you're like, well, I just don't even want to do it at all. So it's like, it's just this building a trust within yourself. It's building that, awareness that there's more out in the world, and then just seeing what lights you up too, because I think that we haven't given ourselves a chance to do that for so long, and you forget that there's that part of you. So just trusting that that part is in there, and letting that unfold. So
These are difficult questions because while I'm not in the field beyond running a support group, one of the things that I recognized my eating disorder was doing was isolating and trying to hide my behaviors from everyone so that they would see me in a particular light. And through my recovery, I don't share my eating disorder with everybody, but I do share it with people that I recognize might gain from my experience. And so a lot of my conversations have my eating disorder as an example of how I process the world. And it's become part of my everyday conversations in essence. And so when you say, do you not think about it? I'm like, well, I do all the time, but, and even sometimes because I'm constantly thinking about it, I recognize that sneaky part that comes in and goes, oh, I'm thinking about food as a coping mechanism. Oh, that's interesting that that's happening right now. But it's more of a I'm aware of it kind of thing rather than it's punishing me and driving me to isolation again. So I don't find myself using it as a coping mechanism, but my brain still thinks about it. I wish I didn't think about those things, but it's sneaky. And maybe I need more years. But I do think about it regularly.
Yeah, I'm so glad that we've got varied experience, and yeah, there was a question in here. I'll just name quickly. How many years did it take you? Gosh, it's so hard to say. It wasn't a clear line, as Laura said earlier. It's not linear, so it can fade and then come back, and all of those things. I want to say though, for me, it was more than 3 years. It was more than 3 years before that freedom started to really show up. But it's different for everyone. I know people that it's true, months. So there's no template for this. I really want to get to this last question. I know we've got 5 minutes, but I think it's a really good one and timely. What tools helped you most to cope with a changing body shape and recovery? It's especially hard as we come into the spring, summer with all the talks of diets, getting summer body ready, etc. I haven't thought about this in so long, so I'll just really quickly mention it. My body changed a lot in recovery. I had to nearly double my body to get into even some semblance of recovery. And that was huge change, constantly going through different clothes. My body was physically changing. My skin was changing. My hair was changing. And the hardest thing was weathering those, because in my mind, bigger meant worse. And so every time I would grow, it was like, and the other thing I'll acknowledge is that it's not true for everyone, but for some people, if weight restoration is part of your experience, sometimes they'll tell you it's not true, but it can be true for some of us. Our body, weight restores in certain places first. It really does. Like, I got huge bloating and it was really uncomfortable. And I think acknowledging that and validating it as a reality is very important. My organs were starved and my body was doing nothing, everything it could to keep them warm. It's really, and it's not like that anymore. And it hasn't been like that in many years. So I needed ritual. I needed something to make meaning of those transitions. They were rites of passage. I had a ceremony to burn my scale. I literally crushed it and I put it into a barbecue pit and set it on fire. I've never weighed myself again, ever, not in 19 years. And if a doctor wants to weigh me, I turn the other way and I say, respectfully, I have no interest in the number on your paper, so please don't tell me. Just because, and it's been a practice for how I relate to my body since. And I would take the clothes that I was growing out of and the changes in my body clothes I no longer fit in, and I would cut them up into little pieces and I would make art out of them. I'd make bags out of jeans. I would make mosaics, anything to make meaning of those changes and make it mean something different than what my head was making of those. So the more you can do that, use art, use ritual, donate, go and put all your clothes and take them to wherever, but the more you can make meaning of those and really fight against that negative story, I think the better.
I'll just have to say that I know through my recovery and for many, many years, and still struggle sometimes depending on stress levels and things, but I struggle with IBS and trying to manage those symptoms. And like you said, Chelsea, with the bloating and like having to just be like, I just need to be comfortable. I just to wear clothes to be comfortable. So instead of like trying to wear the jeans or trying to wear the little tops or the whatever that then make you feel self-conscious or just physically uncomfortable on your body, it's huge. And I know that we had one time in our program in one of the weeks, it was like this huge celebration. One of the members, she just was like, you'll have to excuse me, I'll be right back. And she came back and she was like, I just needed to change my pants. And she went and got out of her jeans because we were doing yoga, got into, soft pants, and it was comfortable once again to be in her body. And it's like that. It's like just honoring what feels good on you and allowing, like Chelsea said, for things to change, like get rid of things that don't feel good, find things that, make you feel comfortable to wear, that make you feel beautiful, and just allow that to morph and change as your body does as well. And yeah, I think it's just it's a growing process, and it is a very challenging, as your body does change to accept those things, but make it as comfortable as possible is my motto.
Otter, do you have thoughts on this one?
I was just thinking that everyone's perspective on this has been very enlightening and helpful for me. And I'm not sure everybody else felt the same way today, but just the wealth of experience and different perspectives has been wonderful for me.
Likewise, I know that's what's so beautiful about this, is being able to bring in everyone's different experiences, being able to have different perspectives, because that's what the point of this is, right? Is to show that recovery looks so different for all of us, and to be able to speak to our own individual experiences and hopefully provide that validation and acknowledgement of what others may be going through. And that's from all the questions that we've seen. I think we've gotten a good collection of that. Yeah, just truly always so helpful to be a part of community and being reminded that we're not doing this alone. For those of us that have had, 10, 20 years in recovery, we still want community as much as folks that are, newly seeking recovery. So really happy to be here with everyone. I don't have anything else additionally to add to the talk of diet culture things along with summer, but just a reminder that bodies are not trends and they're not meant to change throughout seasons, unless that's part of your journey with your body, that's what you're needing to do, but that you don't need to change your body to look a certain way for a season, and that a lot of that messaging is really deeply ingrained in diet culture, and we have a whole community of folks that are not living in accordance to diet culture. So hope that you can have that reminder voice alongside of you as we move into these warmer months. And as always, thank you everyone for joining us. Chelsea, Laura, Otter, thank you so much. And Melanie behind the scenes over at Eat, Breathe, Thrive, doing so much to keep us all connected and getting all of the links out. Thank you everyone for spending your time with us this afternoon.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you. Bye everyone.